The sky exploded into a fury of crimson and indigo as Zara Vance watched her world crumble beneath her. The stagecoach that had been carrying her across Arizona territory lay in splintered ruins at the bottom of Serpent's Gulch, leaving her stranded on a narrow ledge halfway down the canyon wall in the gathering dusk of June 1878. "Hello." Her voice echoed through the vast emptiness, answered only by the mournful cry of a distant hawk. "Anyone there?" Blood trickled down her temple as she pressed herself against the rough stone face of the canyon. The other passengers, including her uncle who had promised her a new life in Tucson, were gone, either dead in the wreckage below or thrown to some other fate. The driver and guard had fallen with the horses when the road had collapsed beneath their wheels, sending them plummeting into the abyss. Zara clutched her torn blue traveling dress, assessing her options with growing dread. The ledge she'd landed on was barely 5 feet wide, with no visible path up or down. At 22, she had survived plenty the loss of her parents to fever 3 years prior, the harsh life of a seamstress in St. Louis, and the whispered rumors that followed a young woman with no prospects, but this seemed beyond endurance. Night fell rapidly in the desert, bringing with it a bone-chilling cold that cut through her clothing. Stars emerged like diamond dust against black velvet as Zara huddled against the canyon wall, knees drawn to her chest. She had one canteen of water, a small drawstring purse containing her life savings, and a tattered journal meager provisions against the wilderness. "I will not die here," she whispered, though her trembling voice betrayed her fear. "I will not." As the moon climbed higher, casting silvery light across the rugged landscape, Zara began to see her precarious situation more clearly. The ledge extended farther than she'd initially thought, curving around a bend in the canyon wall. If she could make it around that bend, perhaps there might be a way up or at least a wider space to wait for rescue. Inch by painful inch, she began to move along the narrow shelf, her back pressed against the cool stone. Every loose pebble that skittered over the edge sent her heart racing. 20 feet. 40. The distance seemed endless, but finally she rounded the bend. Relief flooded through her as she discovered the ledge widened into a small alcove, offering minimal shelter. More importantly, she could see what appeared to be natural hand and footholds leading upward a steep and dangerous path, but perhaps her only chance at survival. By first light, Zara had made 3 attempts to scale the wall, each ending in painful falls back to her alcove sanctuary. Her hands were raw and bleeding, her dress torn at the hem. The sun rose like a vengeful eye promising merciless heat. She rationed sips from her canteen, knowing dehydration would kill her faster than the fall. The second day passed in a haze of heat, thirst, and failed climbing attempts. By the third morning, Zara's canteen was empty, her lips cracked and bleeding. The stagecoach company wouldn't send a search party for days, perhaps weeks. The route was isolated, chosen specifically to avoid Apache territory and known outlaw haunts. "Someone will come," she told herself, though the words rang hollow. Someone must come. On the 4th night, clouds gathered like bruises across the darkening sky. The air grew heavy with the promise of rain, rare and precious in these parts. Zara spread her skirt to catch whatever droplets might fall, desperately hoping for enough water to sustain her another day. When the first fat raindrops splashed against the canyon walls, she nearly wept with relief. But as the heavens opened, her gratitude turned to terror. The gentle rain transformed into a torrent, sending rivulets cascading down the canyon walls. Her small alcove began to flood, the narrow ledge becoming treacherously slippery. Lightning split the sky, illuminating her desperate situation in stark relief. The downpour only intensified, threatening to wash her from her precarious perch. Clutching at the rock face, Zara fought against the rising panic. "Help!" she screamed into the storm, knowing her voice couldn't possibly carry above the thunder. "Please, someone help me!" It was in that moment of utter desperation, with rain lashing against her face and thunder shaking the very stones beneath her feet, that she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats, steady and purposeful, moving along the canyon rim. "Down here!" Zara shouted, voice raw with hope and fear. "I'm down here." Through sheets of rain, she glimpsed movement above a silhouette against the storm-tossed sky, a rider on horseback, pausing at the canyon edge. "Hello." The voice was deep, carrying easily despite the storm's fury. "Someone there?" "Yes." Zara scrambled to her feet, waving frantically. "I'm trapped on the ledge." The rider disappeared from view, and for one terrible moment she feared he'd left or been a hallucination born of her desperate hope. Then a rope snaked down the canyon wall, its end landing just feet from her position. "Can you reach it?" the voice called. Zara lunged for the lifeline, nearly slipping in her haste. Her fingers closed around the rough hemp and she felt a sob of relief build in her throat. "I've got it," she called back. "Tie it around your waist," came the instruction. "Double knot it." "I'll pull you up." With trembling hands she secured the rope, tugging it to test the knot. "Ready. Hold tight and walk up the wall as I pull." The rope went taut, and Zara felt herself lifted from the ledge. Rain-slicked stones scraped against her as she scrambled for purchase, feet kicking against the canyon wall, helping to propel herself upward. Every muscle screamed in protest, but the steady tension on the rope never faltered. After what seemed an eternity, hands reached down to grasp her arms, hauling her over the edge onto solid ground. Zara collapsed, gasping, as thunder rolled overhead. Through rain-blurred vision, she looked up at her rescuer. He knelt beside her, water streaming from the brim of his hat, a tall man with broad shoulders and a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, even in the darkness, seemed to pierce through the gloom with startling intensity. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Can't leave you here," he replied, his voice carrying a slight drawl. "Storm's getting worse. My camp's not far." He helped her to her feet, supporting her when her legs threatened to buckle. His horse, a magnificent bay stallion, stood nearby, head lowered against the driving rain. "Name's Caleb Irvine," he said, lifting her onto the saddle before mounting behind her. "Folks call me Cal." "Zara Vance," she replied, grateful for the solid warmth of him at her back. "The stagecoach saw the wreckage earlier today," he cut in grimly. "Didn't look like anyone could have survived. How'd you end up on that ledge, thrown clear somehow?" she explained as he guided the horse through the darkness. "Everyone else." "We'll talk when you're dry," Cal said, sensing her distress. "Hold on now." Zara leaned back against his chest, too exhausted to maintain her posture. The rhythmic motion of the horse beneath them and the steady beat of rain against her skin lulled her into a semi-conscious state. She was barely aware when they arrived at a small cavern cut into the canyon wall, the entrance partially concealed by scrub brush. Cal dismounted first, then lifted her down with surprising gentleness. Inside, a small fire burned, protected from the elements by the cave's overhang. The space was sparse but organized: bedroll, saddle as a pillow, coffee pot, and provisions stacked neatly against one wall. "Sit by the fire," he instructed, leading his horse to a sheltered corner where the animal could dry. "Need to get you warm." Zara sank down gratefully beside the flames, her sodden dress clinging to her frame. Now that she was safe, the true extent of her ordeal began to register. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, and tears mingled with rainwater on her cheeks. Cal returned with a worn but clean blanket, draping it around her shoulders. "Here," he said, offering a tin cup of something hot. "Coffee's strong, but it'll warm you up." She accepted it gratefully, the heat seeping into her frozen fingers. As she sipped the bitter liquid, she studied her rescuer in the firelight. Caleb Irvine was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. His face was clean-shaven, unusual for men in these parts, with a strong jaw and those remarkable eyes deep blue, like the sky after a storm. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to relying on himself, tending to his horse before changing into dry clothes behind a respectful partition of his saddle and gear. "The stagecoach," Zara said finally, finding her voice. "We're there. Did you see any other survivors?" Cal shook his head as he settled across the fire from her. "No, madam. Bodies were still in the wreckage. 4 passengers by my count, plus the driver and guard. Looked like the road gave way under them. My uncle was among them," she whispered. "He was taking me to Tucson. I was to work in his dry goods store. I'm sorry for your loss." She nodded, clutching the coffee cup tighter. "What were you doing out there? In the middle of a storm?" A faint smile touched his lips. "I could ask you the same about being trapped on a ledge." When she didn't return his smile, he continued more seriously. "I track for the Army sometimes. Was heading back to Fort Bowie when I spotted the wreckage. Thought I should check for survivors before reporting it. Lucky for me you did." "Lucky for both of us I was running late," he corrected. "Would have passed by yesterday otherwise." As the storm raged outside, they shared a simple meal of jerky and hard biscuits. Cal offered her his bedroll, which she accepted only after his insistence. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt herself falling, heard the screams of the other passengers as the stagecoach tumbled into the abyss. "You're safe now," Cal's voice came softly from his position near the cave entrance. "Try to rest." "I keep seeing it happen," she admitted. "I know." Something in his tone suggested he understood all too well. "Sometimes talking helps." Zara hesitated, then found herself telling him everything about losing her parents, struggling to support herself as a seamstress, finally accepting her uncle's offer to come west when the alternatives instinct. Louis became too grim to contemplate. "And now I have nothing," she concluded. "No family, no prospects, not even a change of clothes." "You have your life," Cal pointed out. "That's something." The night passed slowly, with Zara drifting in and out of fitful sleep. By morning the storm had broken, leaving behind a washed clean world glistening in the early light. Cal was already awake, tending the fire and brewing fresh coffee when she stirred. "Morning," he greeted her. "How are you feeling?" "Alive," she replied with a wan smile. "Sore, but alive." "That'll do for now." He handed her a cup of coffee. "We need to get you to town. Nearest one's Willow Creek, about 2 days' ride from here. They'll have a telegraph office where you can contact anyone you might know." Reality crashed down on Zara anew. "I don't have anyone to contact. My uncle was my last living relative." Cal studied her over the rim of his cup. "What will you do? Find work somewhere, I suppose. I'm a decent seamstress." He nodded thoughtfully. "Willow Creek's growing, might be opportunities there." They set out after a sparse breakfast, Zara once again riding double with Cal. The landscape was transformed after the rain. Wildflowers had already begun to peek from crevices in the rocky terrain, and the air smelled of damp earth and sage. Despite her circumstances, Zara couldn't help but marvel at the rugged beauty surrounding them. "Been out here long?" she asked as they rode. 10 years, Cal replied. "Came west after the war ended. You fought, Union cavalry. Was just a boy when I enlisted, 16, lying about my age." "And after?" He was silent for a moment. Couldn't settle back east. Too many ghosts. Out here, a man can breathe. They made camp that evening by a small stream swollen from the previous night's rain. As Cal prepared their simple meal, Zara attempted to wash some of the dirt and blood from her dress and person, grateful for the privacy afforded by a stand of cottonwoods. "You clean up nice," Cal commented when she returned to the campfire, her damp hair hanging loose around her shoulders. Zara felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Not really, but thank you for being kind." "Not being kind, just observant." He handed her a plate of beans and salt pork. "Been tracking for too long not to notice details." As they ate, Zara found herself studying him covertly. There was something compelling about Caleb Irvine, a quietness that spoke not of weakness, but of carefully contained strength. His hands were calloused and strong, yet he handled everything with surprising gentleness, from his horse to the tin plates they ate from. "Tell me about Willow Creek," she requested, partly to distract herself from these unsettling observations. "Small place, but growing. Got a hotel, general store, couple saloons. Sheriff's decent, Miller's his name. They started building a proper schoolhouse last time I passed through." He set his plate aside. "It's civilized enough, but not so civilized it's forgotten what matters." "And what matters, Mr. Irvine?" His eyes met hers across the fire. "Looking out for each other, being honest, working hard." Simple virtues, Zara reflected, yet increasingly rare in her experience. In St. Louis, she'd seen enough dishonesty and exploitation to last a lifetime. That night, as she lay wrapped in Cal's spare blanket beneath the vast canopy of stars, she found herself wondering what her life might become. The future that had seemed so certain just days ago, working in her uncle's store, perhaps eventually meeting a suitable man, settling into a respectable marriage, had vanished. In its place lay complete uncertainty, terrifying yet somehow exhilarating. "Cal," she whispered, unsure if he was still awake. "Yes," came his immediate reply. "Thank you, not just for saving me, but for everything after." There was a pause before he answered. "Get some sleep, Zara. We've got ground to cover tomorrow." The journey to Willow Creek continued at dawn. As they rode, Cal pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the territory, Apache raids from years past, mining booms that had come and gone, the establishment of the stage routes that connected these isolated outposts to the wider world. "That's it," he said late the following afternoon, gesturing toward a collection of buildings nestled in a small valley ahead. Willow Creek. The town was larger than Zara had imagined, perhaps 30 buildings arranged along a main street, with smaller dwellings scattered around the periphery. A church steeple rose above the other structures, and she could make out the outline of the half-completed schoolhouse Cal had mentioned. People turned to watch as they rode down the main street, curiosity evident in their expressions. A woman riding double with a known tracker was bound to raise questions in a place where gossip served as primary entertainment. Cal guided his horse to a modest 2-story building with Willow Creek Hotel painted across its facade. A gray-haired woman was sweeping the porch, her movements brisk despite her apparent age. "Mrs. Harker," Cal called in greeting as he dismounted. The woman shaded her eyes, peering at them. "Well, if it isn't Caleb Irvine, been months since you passed through." Her gaze shifted to Zara. "And who might this be?" "Zara Vance. Survived a stagecoach accident 2 days back. Needs lodging and maybe work if you know of any." Mrs. Harker's expression softened. "You poor dear. Come inside, let's get you settled." Zara slid from the horse, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. Before following Mrs. Harker, she turned to Cal. Are you staying in town?" Something flickered in his eyes. "Got to report to the army about the stagecoach, then I've got tracking work lined up." He hesitated. "I'll check on you before I head out." "Thank you," she said, disappointed despite herself. What had she expected? That he would stay? That their paths, which had crossed by mere chance, would somehow remain entwined? Mrs. Harker proved to be a godsend. Upon hearing Zara's full story, the older woman not only provided a room at a reduced rate, but also loaned her a clean dress and introduced her to the town's seamstress, who immediately offered her work. "Martha's fingers aren't what they used to be, Mrs. Harker explained as they walked to the small shop the following morning. "She needs younger eyes for the fine stitching." Martha Green was a widow in her 60s with spectacles perched on the end of her nose and a perpetually worried expression. She examined Zara's sample stitches with a critical eye before nodding in satisfaction. "You'll do," she declared. "Pays fair, hours are long. Can start today if you're willing." Zara accepted gratefully, throwing herself into the work with determination. Sewing had never been her passion, but she took pride in her craftsmanship. By the end of her first day, her back ached and her eyes burned, but she felt a sense of accomplishment that had been missing in St. Louis, where her work had been anonymous and unappreciated. A week passed with no sign of Cal. Zara told herself it didn't matter, he had his life. She was building hers. The sheriff had sent telegrams about the stagecoach accident, and eventually her uncle's modest estate would be settled. In the meantime, she had a roof over her head, work to occupy her hands, and the beginnings of acceptance in Willow Creek. Yet each night, as she lay in her small room above the hotel, she found herself remembering those hours in the cave, the quiet understanding in Cal's blue eyes, the strength in his hands as he pulled her from the canyon, the solid warmth of him behind her on the horse. Memories she had no right to treasure, yet couldn't seem to relinquish. "You're mooning, girl," Mrs. Harker observed one evening as Zara picked at her dinner in the hotel's small dining room. "Over that tracker, I'd wager." Zara flushed. "I'm just grateful to him. He saved my life." "Hum." The older woman's tone was knowing. Cal Irvine's had half the unmarried women in 3 counties sighing after him for years. None have caught him yet. "I'm not trying to catch anyone," Zara protested. "Might be that's why he looked at you different." Before Zara could question this statement, the hotel door swung open, and the subject of their conversation stepped inside. Cal had clearly just arrived in town. Dust covered his clothing, and several days' growth of beard darkened his jaw. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Zara with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Miss Vance," he said, removing his hat. "Mrs. Harker." "About time you showed your face," the older woman remarked, rising from the table. "Girl's been wondering if you'd fallen off the face of the earth." She ignored Zara's mortified expression. "I'll get you a plate. You look half-starved." Left alone at the table, Zara struggled to find her voice. "I wasn't." She exaggerates. A smile tugged at Cal's mouth as he sat across from her. "I meant to come back sooner. Got held up tracking a group of deserters for the army. You don't owe me explanations, maybe not, but I wanted to see how you were settling in." "Well enough," she replied, suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. "Martha Green gave me work at her shop. Mrs. Harker's been kind." "Glad to hear it." Mrs. Harker returned with a heaping plate, which Cal accepted with thanks. As he ate, he and Zara fell into surprisingly easy conversation. She told him about her work at the seamstress shop, while he shared edited versions of his tracking adventures. "How long will you stay in town?" Zara asked as they finished their coffee. "Not sure. Need supplies and my horse could use the rest." He hesitated. "Thought I might attend the social at the church tomorrow night if you'd care to join me." Zara blinked in surprise. "A social?" "Town holds one every month. Nothing fancy, just music, some dancing, pie auction for the school fund." "I'd like that," she said, trying to temper the ridiculous flutter of excitement in her chest. Cal nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "I'll call for you at 7. The following day passed in a blur of anticipation as Zara worked on altering one of Mrs. Harker's old dresses for the occasion. The faded blue calico wasn't fashionable, but with fresh lace at the collar and cuffs and the waist taken in, it would serve well enough. "He's never escorted a woman to the social before," Mrs. Harker commented as she helped Zara with her hair that evening. "Always comes alone, dances a few dances out of politeness, then leaves early." "Perhaps he just feels responsible for me," Zara suggested, unwilling to read too much into the invitation. The older woman snorted. "Caleb Irvine doesn't do anything out of mere obligation. Man's too independent for that." When Cal arrived to escort her, Zara barely recognized him. Gone was the dusty tracker. In his place stood a clean-shaven gentleman in a well-worn but perfectly respectable suit, his dark hair neatly combed. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. The social was held in the church meeting hall, decorated with paper lanterns and wildflowers. Nearly everyone in town seemed to be in attendance, from infants to elders. A small band played lively tunes in one corner, while tables laden with food and drink lined the opposite wall. Zara felt the curious stares as Cal led her inside, but his steady presence beside her made them easier to bear. He introduced her to people he knew: the sheriff, the general store owner and his wife, the young schoolteacher. "Would you care to dance?" he asked as the band struck up a waltz. "I'm not very practiced," she admitted. "Neither am I," he replied with a smile that transformed his serious face. "We can be unpracticed together." They moved onto the floor, Cal's hand warm against her waist. For a man who claimed to lack practice, he guided her with surprising grace, his steps sure and his hold secure. As they circled among the other dancers, Zara felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. "Everyone's watching us," she murmured. "Let them," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "They're just surprised to see me enjoying myself." The evening passed in a whirl of dances, conversations, and laughter. Zara found herself welcomed by the townspeople, not as an object of pity but as a potential new neighbor. Cal never strayed far from her side, his quiet attentiveness both thrilling and puzzling. "Why me?" she asked as they walked back to the hotel under a canopy of stars. "Mrs. Harker says you never court anyone." Cal was silent for several steps. "Never found anyone who made me want to stay in one place," he finally said. "Been wandering so long it became a habit. And now—" He stopped, turning to face her in the moonlight. "Now I find myself thinking about building something, a home maybe, a life that isn't just passing through." Zara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Because of me. Because of what finding you made me realize." His hand came up to touch her cheek, calloused fingers infinitely gentle. "That some things are worth stopping for." The kiss, when it came, was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. Zara answered by stepping closer, her hands resting lightly on his chest as the kiss deepened into something warm and promising. "I can't offer much," Cal said when they parted, his voice rough with emotion. "Got some land up near Eagle Mountain, but nothing built on it yet." "I don't need much," she replied. "Just honesty. And perhaps patience. This is all so sudden." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I've waited this long to find something worth staying for. I can wait a bit longer to be sure." Over the following weeks, Cal remained in Willow Creek, taking only short tracking jobs that kept him nearby. They established a courtship that became the talk of the town walks after Zara finished at the seamstress shop, Sunday dinners at the hotel, occasional rides into the surrounding countryside. During these outings, Zara learned Cal's story in full: his childhood in Pennsylvania, the horrors he'd witnessed during the war, his gradual journey westward as he sought a place where the memories didn't haunt him quite so persistently. "Found peace out here," he told her as they sat beside a small creek one Sunday afternoon. "Not forgetting exactly, but perspective, room to breathe." "Is that why you became a tracker?" "Partly. Good at reading signs, always have been, and I needed work that kept me moving." He picked up a small stone, turning it over in his fingers. "Never thought I'd want to settle till now." Zara studied his profile, struck anew by how much had changed in the 2 months since the stagecoach accident. What had seemed like the end of all her hopes had somehow led her here, to this man and this place that increasingly felt like where she belonged. "I'd like to see your land," she said impulsively. Cal's eyes brightened. "Really? It's not much to look at yet, but it could be. Someday." The journey to Eagle Mountain took the better part of a day. Mrs. Harker, acting as unofficial chaperone, accompanied them, though she tactfully rode far enough ahead to give them privacy while remaining within sight. The property, when they reached it, took Zara's breath away, not for what it was, but for what it could become. 20 acres nestled against the foothills, with a year-round spring feeding a small meadow. Ancient cottonwoods provided shade, and in the distance, the mountains rose purple and majestic against the sky. "There," Cal said, pointing to a flat area near the spring. "Thought I'd build the house there. Good view, protected from the worst of the winter winds." Zara could see it a simple cabin at first, perhaps, but with room to grow. A garden beside the spring, maybe a barn eventually with horses and a cow or two. "It's perfect," she said softly. Cal studied her face. "Perfect enough to share with me." She met his gaze steadily. "Are you asking me properly, Caleb Irvine?" With a smile that transformed his entire face, he dismounted, then helped her down from her horse. To her astonishment, he knelt in the grass before her, taking her hands in his. "Zara Vance, I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, building a life with me here?" Tears blurred her vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." He rose, gathering her into his arms for a kiss that held all the promise of their future. "Well, it's about time," Mrs. Harker called from her position several yards away. "Thought I'd have to sit on this horse all day waiting for you to get around to it." They were married 2 weeks later in the Willow Creek Church, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. The modest cabin Cal had started building wasn't finished yet, so they took rooms at the hotel until it would be ready. On their wedding night, as they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through their window, Cal traced the line of Zara's cheek with gentle fingers. "You know what I think about sometimes," he murmured. "What's that?" "How close I came to missing you. If I hadn't been running late that day, if the storm hadn't forced me to seek shelter in that canyon, if you hadn't survived that fall." Zara silenced him with a kiss. "But you weren't, and it did, and I had. That's what matters." 5 years later, Zara stood on the porch of their home, no longer just a cabin, but a proper house with glass windows and a stone chimney, watching Cal return from town with their 3-year-old daughter, Emily, perched in front of him on the saddle. Their son, James, just a year old, slept in the cradle she had gently rocked with her foot. As Cal lifted Emily down and caught sight of Zara watching them, his face broke into the smile that still made her heart race, the smile that had changed everything that night in the storm-lashed canyon when he had pulled her from the darkness into light. "Welcome home," she called. "Best words in the English language," he replied, crossing the yard to embrace her. "Always will be. From disaster had come deliverance, from loss had come love." And as the sun set behind Eagle Mountain, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Zara knew with absolute certainty that being thrown into that canyon alone had led her exactly where she was meant to be.